Here we go. Messages. Hey, what's up, you guys? Hey, this is Johnny Bean TV. We have a very special guest today, so make sure you subscribe to the channel. Drop your comments below, and let's do a show right here on. Actually, what channel is this, Michael?
Hey, this is Michael Anthony right here, and you are watching exclusively Van Halen on the Johnny Bean TV. Keep it there. Woo! See ya!
Hey, what's up, you guys? Johnny Bean here. This is exclusively Van Halen, the Van Halen Show on YouTube and X and Facebook and wherever else, Twitch, everywhere there is, right? Even even in Nashville as
Yeah,
well.
and I gotta follow Michael Anthony. Come on, wow, that's quite a thing.
Yeah. So hey, Jim Gaustad, dude, it's great to see you. I know it's been a little while. You were here. We were saying maybe 3 years ago. Maybe I think it's longer than that.
Right before, yeah, it's probably shortly after I did that first Brown Sound Quest video for Van Halen. That would be my guess why I showed up on your show. Yeah, I can't. Maybe it was that time I got arrested out there, but I don't think that was it. I think it's more to do with the Van Halen thing. So,
5150, man.
there you go. There you go.
There
We're
you
not
go.
going to get into that whole argument, though. Who? No, we can't do that.
No, but
David,
we're
not going to go there.
yeah, but we're gonna talk some guitar. We're gonna talk about you. We're gonna talk about your history and everything. But first, you guys, we got to say hello to the top tier of channel members on the Johnny Bean YouTube channel. Channel memberships, the way you can help support the channel and support these shows. And the top tier, the executive producers, they are Music Therapy Laz, Majestic PB and J Cat, Woody Be Real, Flipper Carlin, CC, Bay Area Rich, Sherman Callahan, Nova 9, Warlag, R Habs, and Janice Lala, the intern. Thank you so much for your continued support as channel members here on the Johnny Bean YouTube, the YouTube side of the show. Right. This is an internet show now.
Wow.
So it's everywhere. It's all over the place.
All encompassing.
Yeah. So
You put it next to other internet shows, it'll eat them. It'll melt them, right? Is that the way it works, right?
it is.
Good.
That's
To
I mean, we have Jim Gaustad, you
Right.
know?
Paraphrasing that old David Lee Roth quote, you put a Johnny Bean podcast up against any other podcast, it'll melt all the other podcasts.
That's right. That's right, man. So let's. I know you were here before, and I know we talked about some stuff, but let's go back and talk about Jim Gaustad. How did you get in? How did you get into playing the guitar? First of all.
Okay, so that's going way back. We're going back to about 1975. Yikes, right? So I'm 9 years old. My story, I've got an older brother, 2 years older than me. And our story is very similar to one that you've heard before, actually. So I joined a little marching band thing because they had great uniforms. They were the cavalry uniforms, and they were called the Cavalettes. And I was going to play a tom tom, right? That was going to be my job in this marching band. And I brought my drum home, and my brother was bigger than me, so he took the drum away from me and marched around our backyard and never gave me the drum back. So I said, shortly thereafter, we're watching the Midnight Special. If those of you that remember that are old enough, back in the 70s, Burt Sugarman's Midnight Special and Don Kirshner's rock concert and all that stuff. So my mom would let us stay up late, and we were watching that. Came on after Saturday Night Live, and saw a guitar player by the name of Rory Gallagher. Again, I'm 9 years old, and he blew me away. He absolutely blew me away. So the very next day, I begged my mom for a guitar. I said, I want to play guitar. John, my brother, he's going to play drums, so I want to play guitar. So we didn't have a lot of money. We had to put one on layaway. An acoustic guitar was this Stella Harmony with action like this on it. Took lessons for about 6 months and quit taking lessons, and kind of taught myself from that point forward. I had a buddy who was about 2 years older than me, and he had an electric. He had a Les Paul copy, one of those old National Les Paul copies, and I ended up getting a Hondo 2 Les Paul copy, and so we were doing all that stuff. So fast forward to I had already had a band together, so I started my first band when I was probably 11. My brother playing drums, me playing guitar. And, so I'm over at this buddy's house, and we had already played some gigs, so I knew enough, I could play some Aerosmith, some Foghat, some Ted Nugent, the stuff that was big before Van Halen came out, right? So I'm over at this friend who's a couple years older, my brother's age, and we got our guitars there and everything. It's Thanksgiving Day, 1978, and he says, "You got to hear this. You got to hear this." He puts this record on the turntable and puts the needle on it, and he skipped Running with the Devil. He went right to Eruption. He went right to that, and it was like, holy crap! What the hell is that? That was the coolest thing we had ever heard. So that was my intro to Van Halen. So that was 78. So I was 12 years old at that point, and that kind of started the progression. I wasn't good enough to play that stuff. None of us could figure that stuff out. There was no YouTube. There was no tablature. There was no such thing as tabs back then. You'd go to the record store and you'd buy the music book that came out for the album, and it'd be some piano score with the lyrics. It was like
music.
Yeah, you couldn't learn anything from that. They'd have the cowboy chords above I don't think that's how they're playing it, and so that was of no use. So, we did our best back then to figure out, you take the needle off the record, you start it over again. Because honestly, it wasn't before cassette decks, but that was kind of a luxury to have a cassette deck. So you could rewind, stop, play, rewind. So we'd actually do it with a turntable, and drop the needle and listen, drop the needle. So it was great ear training, because you'd get sick of constantly doing that. And plus you'd ruin your stylus and your record. But I told this story the other day. So I was sitting in my bedroom playing. I played all the time. I love playing guitar. So I played all the time when I was a young guy. I still do. But my mom came in, and I'm just sitting there with that acoustic guitar. And my mom comes in to the bedroom, and she wanted me to do something. I don't know, go cut the grass or do some kind of thing. And I was irritated with her, and I had my hand rested on the fingerboard over the sound bowl. I just sound or over the sound hole and over this way, and I just kind of was irritatedly tapping my hand, just kind of like a nervous tap. And I went, "That's it. That's how he's doing that." And
Too bad you didn't figure that out 5 years earlier.
Yeah, but I was a little young to be in the clubs anyway. So it might not have helped me that much. But that's kind of where it started for me, and I just kept doing that. And I was playing bars, clubs when I was, probably 14. I did my first club when I was 12. I played. My father had to be there because they were serving alcohol and everything. And then I was, regularly playing gigs. We did all the stuff that all the bands did. We were trying to be original. We were playing covers. We were trying to be original. And then we tried to make some money so we could buy a PA. So we put together a 50s, 60s wedding band. Anything that would pay the bills, and you'd buy PA gear across the city, and you'd carry the columns all the way home because you didn't have a car. That sort of thing. We did all that stuff. So it's kind of a typical upbringing in the 70s and the early 80s, and um, multiple rock bands. I was a hired gun on a band that was already established called The Victims. They were doing really well on the college circuit, national touring, had a record deal. I played and toured with them for like 3.5 years, and then after that, I was in another original band that was more of a rock bent, more of a big rock bent, kind of the Van Halen kind of thing, and that was a regional band. Another record and a half came out from those guys. That was the Flying Tigers. You can find some of that material I've got on my YouTube channel. And so it's kind of been that off and on. And then I wouldn't say I retired from the business, but I kind of took a step back, and I'd done a bunch of recording and a bunch of studio stuff, and so I'd been exposed to all sides of it, and I'd done a lot, and I toured, and I opened up for some big bands, and I'd been around the block with that, so to speak, and I'd kind of been burned out. And somewhere in the 2008, 2009, I got sucked into this. I was playing guitar in my backyard in Chicago, and my neighbor was the marketing director for a club in Chicago, and they would do a thing the third Thursday of every month, and it was classic albums live. And he said, the idea was you'd play an album start to finish, front to back, and you'd be done. And he said, I've been drinking in your backyard. We've been sitting around the fire. I've seen you play guitar. I know some of your history. You guys got to put a band together and play this classic albums live. Nobody's ever done Van Halen. Nobody's had the guts to do Van Halen. Do the first album. I said, yeah, that sounds like fun. And yeah, sounds like fun. Just kind of blew it off. And I see him a few days later, and he goes, I got your book for October. I said, I don't even have a band. So it's kind of like Pacino and The Godfather. I was at part 2, and he said they keep sucking me back in. So that's kind of what started this. I was kind of past my what we used to call a label shot, trying to get signed and do all that stuff and submitting your original material. I was just kind of an old man at that point doing Van Halen tribute stuff. So it was fun. It was fun to me to get back into it and do that. And our whole goal was to play it as accurately as possible with the same equipment that they would have used. So that was the thing. It was identical stuff that they would have used.
The sound and the visual.
Yeah, no wigs, none of what's going on now. I mean, I could have used one, but none of that stuff, none of the flash and all that stuff. I mean, have a great time, put on a good show, just have fun and entertain. But it wasn't the costumes, and it wasn't the wigs, and it wasn't that sort of thing. It was just playing it as accurately as possible with as much fun as possible, capturing that spirit and playing with the same gear. And yeah, we were loud, and we had a great time, and we got away with it. So that kind of grew into a fairly good sized regional showing around the Chicago area, up to Minneapolis and Wisconsin and all that stuff. So we did pretty well with that for a while. And then, COVID came around, and we kind of I just kind of quit. I just kind of put a stop to it. And then Ed passed, around in this whole thing. And when that happened, it was a huge blow. The guy was to me, was a huge influence in what I did. So for me, the whole idea why I started doing those Brown Sound videos, I wanted to do one. Because I always kind of knew how he got the sound on Van Halen I. I had a pretty good idea because I'd been playing that same gear for years, same kind of rig, same all that stuff for all my time touring and all that. And I did that as a tribute to his genius, to what he was. And then that grew into, can you do another one? Can you do the second album? Can you do the third album? Can you do Fair Warning? It's like, okay, so that got me started down this path of doing the YouTube how-to video kind of things and the tone matching and stuff, which which leads us to today, which is why you reached out this time was the not just because we needed to catch up too, but
Yeah. I
but
actually reached out before I even knew this, but because I found the comment, and you had said in the comment, "Hey, I'll come back because there is something.
yeah,
There is something coming."
yeah,
And then what was that, a week ago or something? Like all of a
yeah,
sudden, the whole guitar world, Facebook's going nuts. Well, my Facebook goes nuts anyway for Van Halen, you know.
right.
Um, but yeah, let's get into that. The IK Multimedia.
Yeah, the Brown
I
Sound
mean,
Collection 78-79 is what we called this release.
yeah,
So
I'll show it on the screen. This is this is incredible stuff, man. I mean, if there's anybody that could do it, I mean, it's you. I think everybody agrees. Everything I've seen, everybody talking about this, they're like Jim's the guy.
yeah, I started seeing that too because at first so how this all came about is Chris O'Hara, who's the head of all things guitar marketing at IK Multimedia.
Mm-hmm.
He just reached out to me out of the blue. I want to say it was a year ago January, but it might have been a year ago February, and said, um, he introduced himself, and are you familiar with IK Multimedia? And I said, yeah, of course. I use your Sunset Sound Reverb. It's a great product. I love that thing. And he goes, he kind of said, well, I always laugh about this. He goes, you're the internet Van Halen guy, right? And I chuckled at him. I said, yeah, I guess so. I never consider myself that because there's guys that are just blazing great players out there. But I guess I'm kind of the tone guy. And so he said, well, how do you feel about amp modeling and the whole amp capture and all that stuff? And I pretty much said, I hate it. I don't like it. I've played the Kemper stuff, and I'm not slagging any of them. I mean, I appreciate everything that they do and all of that stuff, but I played all that stuff, and I'm an old guy, and I've played tube amps all my life. And, tube amps are this electromechanical device that, it has a certain feel when you play. You play the amp
Yeah.
almost as much as you play the guitar, and you can get it. It's so much easier for me to express myself on one of those things. Like, I don't use channel switching. I don't, click off to get a clean sound or anything like that. I just use the volume knob on the guitar, and that's the way I was brought up to play. And you use dynamics with your right hand. So that's what a tube amp allows you to do, or that's what I'm used to playing. So whenever I played modeling amplifiers, they don't do that. They don't clean up really nice. You typically got to switch, patches or whatever you call them, profiles. And they're not super responsive to right hand dynamics when you're playing. So I was just turned off by them. And so this Chris, he kind of dragged me into this. I won't say kicking and screaming. It was reluctantly. He said, well, would you at least check it out? And I said, yeah, I'll check it out. So initially when I got it loaded up, I was pretty impressed with it, with some of the profiles that he had recommended, some of the tone models that he had recommended. I thought, that's pretty cool. This is worth exploring. So we had more conversations, and then they set me up with some of the equipment that I would need to start creating captures. They were seeking me out because of those videos, and they knew I had the equipment. I had the matching, the period correct, and all of that stuff. The Edward Van Halen, the 12, for those that are very far down the rabbit hole, the serial number 12301, that 68 Marshall Super Lead, that the famous Magic Marshall that Ed had. So I've got that ground up recreation of that amplifier. So, and I've got all the vintage speaker cabinets and all that stuff. And, I've been so far down that tone rabbit hole, it's ridiculous. So that's kind of how it all came about. That's how this whole thing started. So speak to me,
Man. So did they have a Van Halen? Did they have any Van Halen stuff already that they showed you and said, hey, how can we make this,
No,
closer?
No, they didn't. I mean, they had maybe a couple of decent Plexi models, Plexi Marshall models. But what we decided to do, I guess, early on, is instead of just do another Plexi capture, another, it's a great amplifier. I mean, I love the sound of this amp, but um, instead of just doing one of those and throwing another one of those out into the amp modeling universe or the amp capture universe,
Mm-hmm.
um, I kind of, I guess we both kind of came to this at the same time, Chris and myself, and we said, well, let's try to duplicate what it sounds like on the album. Let's do the finished mixed album product.
Mm-hmm. The
So
first album.
yeah. So while we did for the
Mm-hmm.
78, 79 refers to the first two albums. So 78 is Van
Mm-hmm.
Halen 1 and 79, although Alan Garber, right?
Yes.
So Alan reaches out to
Hi,
me.
Alan.
He goes, I love him like a brother. He is like the king of information. I consult him often. So he sends
You
me
guys need to start a band. You and Alan.
I think we'd probably kill each other. We'd say, hey, you're not right. You're not
No, you're wearing the wig, not me.
But he said, he goes, well, why didn't you guys name that 77, 78? Because that's when the albums were actually recorded. And I said, I know. And we talked about it. But anyway, we just figured we'd appeal to the masses who aren't so far down the rabbit hole that they assume 1978 and 79. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, it was the goal then was how to capture and how to recreate the album tone. So in doing that, in the experimentation and all the things that I was doing, I decided, well, I got to use the entire signal chain. So I got to put the phase 90 in there. I got to put the flanger in there. I got to put the Echoplex in there. I got to use the period correct cable. So I'm using the old Belden wire from the period because this, the newfangled, the high tech cable, the monster cable, the Mogami Canary. Is it Canary or Canary? I never know. Does anybody
I don't
really
know.
know? You know what I'm talking about.
Drop a comment below if you know.
Yeah. Um, I know they got the accent or the squiggly or whatever over the E. Anyway, not important. But those cables are all too bright. There's not enough capacitance in the cable. So I paid attention to every detail and tried to be as accurate as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then did that with everything through the entire process, through the recording process, using an analog console. So as much analog as we could put into this digital pack was the idea behind it. And that
So,
go ahead.
so did you go like song by song on the album?
No, and there's been some confusion about that, and the names in the pack um, don't really correlate. There's not a lot of which was a marketing decision that we are going to release my actual names, the profile names that I did, because when you see that, you'll see the method to my madness. So
Mm-hmm.
there's 4 speaker cabinets in the collection, and they're all period correct because we don't really know what Ed's favorite cabinet was loaded with. We're not sure anyway. We got some pretty good ideas, but there's controversy about the JBL and greenback combination cabinet. Some people say it was that, some people say it wasn't that. So we've included the JBL greenback cabinet because I got that sitting here in the studio.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a 20-watt greenback basket weave cabinet that's sitting here in the studio. I've got the blackback cabinet, and I've got a 25-watt greenback cabinet. So you get those 4 different cabinet selections across the entire collection. And then we give you variac settings, 2 different variac settings through all 4 of those cabinets. So we give you a 78 volt variac setting, which happens to be my favorite. and you get an 89 volt because everybody tends to gravitate towards that 90 volt. You know, the story about setting the Variac at 90 volts. I don't believe it was at 90 volts, not for this, because you can listen. You know, what's that one that video that came out a couple years ago? It's the room mics from Sunset Sound where the band is playing Eruption. You know, they're all sitting in the same room and they're playing Eruption,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just the room mics. It's actually a pretty nice mix in the room. You can hear the drums. In fact, the drums might be a little bit louder than what the guitar is in the room. You know, when they all do the intro, and the bass guitar is super loud compared to the guitar. So you know, the amp, a super lead at 90 volts would be the most dominant thing in that recording. I don't care how many gobos they use, how many baffles they use in the room. They're just so loud at 90 volts. You know, and Ed himself said, I think it was that when he was doing the Smithsonian interview, how he turned it down to 60 volts at times. That was as low as he did it. And I always refer people to, you know, you look at the Letterman videos, you know, when he was a guest on Letterman, and you could see the amp, that original Marshall sitting there. The pilot light was off. You know, the pilot light goes out at about 70, 78 volts on most of the plexis, and it goes completely dark once you get below 78 volts. So you know, there he is. He's at the Letterman show. He's in the Ed Sullivan Theater. I don't know if you've ever been in the Ed Sullivan Theater, but it's not that big, and it's TV.
I've been outside it.
And he's playing with the band. He's playing with Paul Schaefer and the band. You think he's running a plexi at 90 volts with the cabinet sitting right in front of Paul Schaefer? I don't think so. No. So I mean, I always try to dispel that myth. Maybe later on when he was doing the arenas and that sort of thing, sure, then it's not a big deal. But at the Whiskey, at Gazzari's, at those places, he was turning that Variac down. So I've always assumed that he went in to record the first album pretty much with his club rig. That's what he was used to playing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we did the 78 volts, because that to me, that's right where that he made a comment that he used to set the Variac so that when he hit an open G string, the pilot light would flicker and dim. And so that's where I picked 78 volts from, because that's where mine does it. So it's not scientific necessarily, because they all vary a little bit, but that was the idea behind that. So that's how the collection is set up. So you've got the two different Variac settings through all four cabinets, you know, each one at a time. And then I gave you in some cases, if I thought it sounded a little, let me backtrack. So the cabinets, all of those different speaker selections, they sound different. I mean, they're obviously Celestions, and they're all in that same family, except for the JBLs, but they're all in that same family of speakers. They're all basically greenbacks or blackbacks, which a blackback is a greenback with a different colored cap on the back of it. There's some discussion about voice coil material, but that's way too far down the rabbit hole. But those cabinets all sound different. So I had to start with one that was a baseline. So I used my blackback cabinet. No reason why, other than that I used that cabinet a lot. So as I was adjusting the tone models, as I was adjusting the captures, I didn't want to make every cabinet sound identical, because then what would be the point? It would be redundant. All of those cabinets sound different, but I wanted to keep them. I wanted to somehow enhance what their qualities were, but still keeping it in that whole tone vein. So that's what you get. So you hear the slight variances, like the greenbacks are a little bit darker than the blackbacks. And then the 20-watt greenbacks, they got a sound all their own. And right now, they're kind of my favorites. I'm working on the Women and Children First collection, and they're kind of my favorites for what I'm capturing for that so far. We're testing those tone models.
Nice.
And there's the JBL D120s, and you know, I go back and forth on that. So the JBL D120 and the greenback cabinet, I go back and forth on that. Sometimes I think, God, that sounds spot on, and sometimes I go, nah, I don't think that's right. So it just varies with my mood or something. But that was kind of the idea behind how the collection is built. So you get two Variac settings through each cabinet. So you can decide, you can pick and choose which one is your favorite, and you can adjust it then for your guitar. So when you
Hmm.
open up the interface, or if you're using a pedal, everything, all the tone controls and volume controls, gain controls are all set at noon. Because I was very cognizant of, pickups change greatly from guitar to guitar, and so many of the people doing the Van Halen thing now, and chasing that sound, are using the more overwound pickups. They're using the
Hmm.
H Frankenstein or the Wolfgang pickups, or the custom, all the ones that keep getting mentioned, with that are associated with Ed's sound. That's
Hmm.
not what was happening back
But
in
it's all
77.
the Van Halen sound later, not that early stuff.
Correct. So I used what would have been period correct if we believe the story about the 61 335, where he took the PAF out of it.
Hmm.
So a 61 PAF would have had a spec that is so wimpy compared to what's out there now. I mean, it's a 7.625K PAF with a short A5 magnet in it. It's pretty much a low output pickup. And so when you see me do the demos with my black and white striped Frank copy there, that's the pickup that's in it. And I've got a 250K pot in that guitar too. So that takes a little bit of the high end out of it. And then the Destroyer that I'm playing, that's got the Super 70 in it. So they're period
Hmm.
correct pickups. So when I designed the collection, or the captures, so that those volume controls and tone controls are straight up, but it's tuned to my guitars. So when I play it, I play along with the album, and I play it through my studio monitors. To me, it sounds identical. It's spot on. It sounds fantastic. So if you're not getting that, if you've got the collection, you're not getting that, turn the gain down, because your pickup's too hot. Maybe your pickup's too warm. Maybe you got to turn the treble up, or maybe you got to roll some of the bass off. So
Hmm.
make sure you experiment with it, because I was cognizant of that. And I tried I have my guitars with the super distortions. I got the EVH Frank guitars. I've got the JB guitars. So I was testing that all the time. So I was seeing if I could still get to that sound by adjusting those knobs. And I could. So that was the idea behind it. Makes sense, I hope.
Very nice. So anybody can get that sound, and
Right.
everybody wants some. And this looks like the closest thing.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with it, and I'm really impressed with the feel of it. You can actually, the difference between the sag and the amplifier, between the two variac settings, at 89 volts, the amp is a little bit tighter. It's a little, it's fuller through everything, and the distortion character gets a little bit more smooth. On the 78 volt, some of the bottom falls off, some of the top rounds off a little bit more, and it gets saggier. You can actually feel that under your fingers.
Hmm.
I was so blown away by that. I said, "This is really cool." So I was very impressed with TONEX, that it was capable of recognizing that. Because as I started out, I was saying that I wasn't a big fan of the modelers, because I didn't like the way they felt. Because they didn't capture that same feel. This one is pretty impressive. I was very pleased with it.
Nice.
So how much time you want me to ramble here? Because
Oh, we can wrap it up. I know you have to go, and
no, because the big reveal to me is what I did with the tubes, and what I discovered with the tubes in the
can
in the
we
in the Super Lead.
can we hear about that?
Absolutely. So I made well over, once I figured out how to do the captures, and make them accurate to what I was hearing and what the TONEX was wanting to hear and everything.
Hmm.
Once I figured that all out, I could never quite get the distortion character right. There's something about Van Halen 1 that sounds different than all the other albums, and that's what all the
Hmm.
debate has been about forever and ever. And I've got dummy loads, I've got reactive loads, I've got slave this, slave that. I've got a Fender, an old 66 Fender Bassman. I slaved it into the Marshall. I took the output tubes out of the Fender Bassman and just ran the preamp as a slave into the Marshall. I did everything I could. I used the Boss GE10 with the Frown EQ to try to boost the front end of the amp. I could never, ever, ever get that, just the proper distortion character. I could always, I can always EQ it and dial it in so it's right, but it was just the way it sounds. It's just the way that, just the harmonic content of that guitar sound. So I started remembering some things, and I was watching a Tone Talk episode with Asi Hassan from Three Monkeys Solderless, and he's a great guy.
Yeah, I know him. Yeah.
Great creative.
Oh, right there.
There it is. And he was talking about how, you listen to Van Halen 1, he goes, that amp sounds broken. And that's when it clicked. I went, that's right. And so I used to play gigs like I had talked about earlier, playing gigs with a 100-watt super lead. I would play with one tube in the amp. And the amp would get really mean sounding and really, really gritty, and that would be a broken amp, because when you a Marshall, a push-pull amp, you've got the two inside tubes and the two outside tubes. Everybody pulled tubes to make their amp quieter. Everybody would pull two tubes. That's a common practice from back in the day. So you would normally pull the two outside or the two inside tubes, and that would keep you on a push-pull circuit with the sine wave, both sides of the sine wave. That's the way the amp operates. I pulled valves 4 and 5, which are right next to each other. So if you start with the preamp tubes, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So the output tubes are 4, 5, 6, 7. So I pulled tubes 4 and 5. Therefore, the amp was only, if in layman's terms, the amp was only putting out one half of the sine wave, changing the harmonic content of the amp. And as soon as I did that in the room, I went, holy crap, that's it. That is the sound. That is completely the sound. That is the distortion character. So that's what I did. So I started doing all the captures that way for the 78 part of the collection. And that's the sound that you hear. It's that amp that's broken, running, unevenly. And so then there was, and I was, as I was doing this, and part of the not more so, but in addition to that Tone Talk episode with Ozzy, I had seen a quote. It's been rattling around in my head that it was, Ed had said something to Ted Templeman back in the day that I know exactly which tubes to pull to make the amp sound mean or make the amp sound like a chainsaw. And we all assumed that it was, everybody pulled tubes because the amp gets a little bit more compressed if you pull just to try to reduce the power. The amp sounds a little bit different. So we all kind of assumed that throughout the years. But I was thinking about that the whole time after I did it. I said, this has got to be it. This is spot on. So this is, to me, that's the big discovery. And that's the huge difference between the sound of Van Halen 1 and Van Halen 2, because the rest of the albums pretty much sound like a Marshall Plexi. I mean, a good one, but they say it sounds way different than Van Halen 1. So that's my big reveal.
That's amazing. Did you
pretty,
tell Alan this?
Yeah, he was actually, he found the quote for me this morning.
Oh, cool.
He found it was from, I think it's a Ted Templeman interview. He sent me the cover of the publication. It was, it's the I think he said it was a 1981 Bay Area Music BAM magazine.
Oh, BAM. Okay, yeah. I used to have that issue, man. I knew that one.
Yeah. So, like I said, we all assumed that he was just pulling tubes like everybody pulled tubes to quiet the amp down, but no, it was so. To me, like I said, it was obvious in the room.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool. So your work. I mean, the collection. It's out. I'll have a link down below. You guys, I still need to get it.
Yeah,
I still need to get one. I still need to use this, man. A friend of mine gave me this, and I still gotta try it out. And
there's. Some people have been talking about some difficulty of getting it installed and getting everything running. I'm an old guy. I figured it out. You know, it's so.
I think it'd be harder playing those riffs.
People ask me, I am not technical service on this thing, but they've got a great customer service department that's going to help you with all technical stuff. I just created the things.
People are going to be calling this number down here.
That's right. Yeah. Get that Gaustad guy on the phone. I can't get this thing installed. No, I'm not your guy. I'll create the captures and everything, but no, I'm not your guy for that. But they will. They'll help you out if there's a problem installing it.
Very cool. And then, so you said you're working on more?
Yes, and it's going to be weeks, not months. We're going to release Women and Children First and Fair Warning. And then after that, it's going to be bits and pieces of Diver Down, but the focus will be mostly on 1984.
Oh, dude.
So that's what's in the hopper. So that's what I'm working on right now. We're doing some testing right now with the captures and trying to dial a couple of things in. So that's all in the works right now.
Wow.
That's coming up next. So some exciting things happening for sure.
Very cool, man. Well, hey, you'll have to come back. And I mean, it's been a long time. You have to come back anyway. So
I know, but I don't know. I think I'll still be hoarse. I did a lot of talking here today. I don't know.
Man. Well, dude, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. And yeah, I hope everybody goes out and gets this thing, because we've all been chasing this for so many years. It's the closest I could give you to adding the box. And I tell you, if you're using the right guitars, and you got your speakers, if you got a really good tune monitor system like you'd have in a studio, you'll have a hard time telling it between the real album. It sounds really good, and it feels really good.
Dang.
Yeah.
Dang.
I wouldn't have done it if it didn't. I wouldn't have put my name on it, because I'm really proud of it. It's really good.
Dude, thank you so much. Oh, can I get that channel ID really quickly?
Absolutely.
You know what that is? That's where you say, "Hey, yeah. I'm Jim Gaustad, and you're watching Johnny Bean."
Yep. You ready?
Ready.
You rolling?
Rolling.
Hey, everybody, Jim Gaustad here, and I'm super happy to be on Johnny B. What are we calling it, though? Johnny B's what? What are we calling it? Johnny B's what?
It can either be Johnny Bean or exclusively Van Halen, any of that.
You want me to do exclusively Van Halen, Johnny Bean?
Sure.
All right. Hey, everybody, Jim Gaustad here, and I'm super happy to be on Johnny Bean's exclusively Van Halen. See you next time.
Thank you so much, man. There you go. There you go, man. Right on. Well, hey, really quickly, let me say thank you to our channel members. Thank you for your continued support for this channel and these shows. And we will see you guys on the next episode right here on, let's see. Don't hang up really quickly. I'll end the show, and then we'll say goodbye. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you guys next time on...
Hi, this is Dweezil Zappa, and you're watching Johnny Bean TV.
Thank you so much, you guys, for watching. Click on another video on the screen here. Drop your comments below, and we'll see you guys on the next show right here on Johnny Bean TV.